I love painting on wooden palettes, and I will show you in this video how to prep your wooden palette and even turn a scrap piece of plywood into a great studio palette you can use for years and years and years. So you want to do this process for any wooden palette you have, whether you make one from plywood or you get a new French easel, say, that has a wooden palette, or you buy a palette from some art supplier. So I am going to be demoing this on an old piece of plywood we had laying around. It was 18 by 22 inches, and nothing special about that size, but it was a thick kind of 1/4 inch piece of plywood, so it's going to be kind of heavy, definitely meant for a studio palette. So my husband's really into working with wood, so he insisted on sanding it, and this is probably a nice but not necessary step. You don't have to do that necessarily because the next process will fill in any kind of rough gaps that there are. However, sanding it's not going to hurt, and it probably will make it nicer. Okay, so you're going to need linseed oil. I'm using artist grade, but you can get hardware store linseed oil as well. That's totally fine. You can use stand oil or boiled linseed oil. That's fine too. But I like plain old linseed oil because it's thinner and it will like soak in more to the wood. A bunch more will like soak into the wood first. Okay, you'll also need a palette knife and an old rag or paper towel. So after you get the linseed oil open, you just pour it on and evenly scrape it around. It is so kind of satisfying and lovely how much will soak into the raw wood. And so you want to get it really saturated, especially with that first layer. And then after you've done this, like it only takes a few minutes, and then you let it sit for a couple of days until it's pretty well soaked in. And then you add some more linseed oil and wipe that down really good. And then wait a few more days and repeat the process several times until you are satisfied with how much linseed oil that it's absorbed, or until you're just like ready to paint. It honestly isn't that fussy of a process. Like probably perfect world, you'd do at least 3 coats, maybe 6 or 7 coats if you're like really obsessive. But as you paint, you're going to improve the patina all the time anyway, and so you don't need to worry too much about this process. Okay, once you're ready to paint, then you're going to want to put your fresh colors all around the edges of the palette. And you always want to put the same colors in the same places. More on that in a different video. Anyway, so you'll use the middle of the palette then for mixing your colors. So when you're finished painting for the day, you'll scrape your mixed paint out of the middle part, and then wipe it down with a rag. So then you'll finish that cleaning process by adding a few more drops of linseed oil kind of every time into the center of the palette, and then burnish that, kind of wipe it down with another clean rag. And by doing so, it develops this nice, really non-porous, smooth surface that's a little bit shiny. And it'll actually kind of turn gray, take on a grayish color, because there are like tiny bits of leftover pigment suspended in that linseed oil. And it turns out that gray is great. It's a really nice neutral then to be mixing your paints on top of. A lot of times, like, you can purchase actually a plastic gray palette if you want, but why do that when you can, just create your own beautiful gray patina that could literally last you a lifetime if you want. And you'll notice how my palettes sometimes get these stains, and that's because I walked off and left mixed paint sitting on my palette and came back too many days later to really easily scrape that off. So the lesson is always clean your palette every time you paint. Even if you get these stains though, it's really no big deal. Eventually, by repeating this process of scraping the mixed paint and wiping it down with a cloth, it'll get covered over by the gray again. Okay, so do this process for any wooden palette that you have, whether you make one from plywood or get a new one from the store. I hope it goes well for you. Happy painting!